There was a young man named John. He lived in a quiet town where nothing much ever changed. The same streets, the same coffee shop, the same small office building where he worked every single day. John had a dream, a very big dream. He wanted to be rich, not just comfortable, not just doing okay. He imagined a life where money was not a problem, a life where he could travel anywhere, help his parents, start businesses, and live with complete freedom. Every night before going to sleep, John would watch videos about successful entrepreneurs. He would listen to interviews with millionaires. He would read articles about people who started with nothing and built incredible fortunes. And every time he finished watching or reading, he would whisper to himself, "Someday, that will be me." But the next morning, something always happened. Fear. John had ideas, many ideas. He once thought about starting an online store. Another time, he wanted to create a YouTube channel. He even considered investing in a small business with a friend. But every time the moment came to act, his mind filled with doubts. What if it fails? What if I lose money? What if people laugh at me? What if I'm not good enough? So instead of taking the step, he stayed where he was, safe, comfortable, predictable. His job paid him just enough to survive. His apartment was small but okay. His life was stable, and stability can be a very comfortable prison. Years began to pass. 1 year turned into 2. 2 turned into 5. John was now almost 30. The dream of becoming rich was still alive in his mind, but it was fading. Not because he stopped wanting it, but because he stopped believing it would ever happen. One quiet evening after work, John decided to walk through the old part of town. The streets were calm, the air was cool. And as he passed a restaurant he had not visited in years, he heard someone call his name. John. John turned around. Standing near the entrance was a man in a clean suit, smiling confidently. For a moment, John did not recognize him, but then the face clicked in his mind. "Henry?" The man laughed. "Yes, it's me." Henry was an old friend from school. Back then, Henry was known for being bold, sometimes even reckless. He was the guy who always tried new things, new business ideas, new opportunities, new adventures. John remembered that many people used to say Henry was crazy, but now, standing in front of him, Henry looked completely different. He looked successful. His watch was expensive. His car, parked nearby, was a luxury model, and the confidence in his posture was unmistakable. They sat down inside the restaurant and started talking. At first, they shared old memories, school stories, embarrassing moments, teachers they both disliked. But eventually, the conversation shifted. John asked the question that had been sitting in his mind since the moment he saw Henry. "So, what do you do now?" Henry smiled. "I run a logistics company." John blinked. "A company?" Henry nodded. "Actually, 3 companies now." John leaned back in his chair. 3 companies. He looked at Henry again, this time more carefully. The confidence, the calm voice, the way he spoke without hesitation. "Are you doing well?" John asked carefully. Henry laughed. "Let's just say I'm doing better than I ever imagined." There was a brief silence. John stared at the table. And then he asked the question that truly mattered. "How did you do it?" Henry did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember something about me from school?" John thought for a moment. "You were always trying things." Henry nodded. "Exactly." He paused. "I failed. A lot." John looked up. Henry continued. "My first business lost money in 6 months. My second idea collapsed after a year. I invested in something that completely crashed. But each time, I learned something." Henry took a sip of water. "Most people think success comes from one perfect decision." He shook his head slowly. "It doesn't. It comes from many imperfect attempts." John listened carefully. Henry continued. "The difference between people who succeed and people who only dream is risk." Another silence filled the table. John felt something heavy inside his chest. Henry looked directly at him. "So tell me, John, what have you been working on?" John hesitated, and then he told the truth. Nothing. Henry did not laugh. He did not judge. He simply nodded. Why? John sighed. I was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of losing money. Afraid of looking foolish. Afraid of leaving my comfortable life. Henry leaned back in his chair. Then he said something that John would remember for the rest of his life. Comfort is the most expensive thing you will ever buy. John frowned slightly. Henry continued, when you choose comfort, you are secretly paying with your dreams. The words hit hard, very hard. For the next hour, they talked about business, opportunities, and the mindset of successful people. Henry explained that success is rarely about being the smartest person. It is about being the one who acts, the one who tries, the one who keeps moving even when things feel uncertain. When the dinner ended, Henry stood up and placed his hand on John's shoulder. You're still young, he smiled. But don't wait too long. Fear grows stronger with time. They walked outside together. Before getting into his car, Henry said one last thing. If you ever start something, call me. Even if it fails, especially if it fails. Then he drove away. John stood on the sidewalk watching the car disappear down the street. That night, John could not sleep. Henry's words kept echoing in his mind. Comfort is the most expensive thing you will ever buy. He realized something painful. For years, he had been protecting his comfort, but in doing so, he had been slowly destroying his own dream. The next morning, something changed. John opened his laptop. Instead of watching another motivational video, he started writing. He wrote down business ideas. He researched markets. He studied problems people were facing. For the first time in years, he was not just dreaming, he was planning. 2 weeks later, John made his first move. He invested a small amount of money into an online product business. It was terrifying. His hands were shaking when he clicked the final confirmation button. But he did it. For the first few months, nothing happened. Sales were slow. Some days there were 0 orders. Doubt returned. Fear whispered in his ear again. See? This was a mistake. But this time, John remembered Henry. Success comes from many imperfect attempts, so he kept improving. He changed the product page. He studied marketing. He learned how online advertising worked. 6 months later, something surprising happened. The business started growing, not explosively, but steadily. John was making extra income, not millions, but enough to prove something important. It was possible. The following year, John took a bigger step. He quit his job. It was the most frightening decision of his life, but also the most exciting. Now he had no choice. He had to make his business work. He worked longer hours than ever before, sometimes 14 hours a day, sometimes weekends without rest. But slowly, the business expanded. 2 years later, John launched a second project. This time, he was more confident. He understood risk better. He understood failure better. And most importantly, he understood action. Years passed. 5 years after that dinner with Henry, John stood inside his own office building. His company had grown far beyond what he once imagined. He had employees, he had partnerships, he had investments, and yes, he was finally rich. But something even more valuable had changed. He was no longer afraid of risk. One afternoon while sitting in his office, John looked at his phone, and he smiled. He typed a message. Hey Henry, dinner tonight? My treat. A few hours later, they sat at another restaurant, just like before. Henry looked around the elegant room. Then he looked back at John. Well, he smiled. Looks like you did pretty well. John laughed. I guess I did. Henry raised his glass. To risk. John raised his glass too. To leaving the comfort zone. And in that moment, John realized something powerful. Success did not begin the day his business made money. It began the day he finally chose courage over comfort. Because dreams do not belong to the people who wait. They belong to the people who dare, the people who try, the people who risk failure in order to discover their true potential. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one conversation with the right person and one brave step into the unknown.